The restaurant Los Molcajetes de Doña Eva was packed that midday. The Sinaloa sun beat down mercilessly, and the heat seeped into the kitchen where the aroma of freshly made tortillas and grilled meat filled the air. Among the diners, an older man ate in silence, oblivious to the bustle. Grey hair, dark glasses, a white shirt buttoned to the neck. No one seemed to pay him any attention, except for a group of young men sitting at the back table. "Isn't that the old guy who snitches to the police?" one of them muttered. "They say so, that he was an informant in the Culiacan prison," added another, lighting a cigarette with arrogance. 3 minutes later, without warning, the young men got up and walked straight toward him. One pulled out a switchblade, another started recording. And the third, amidst nervous laughter, grabbed the old man by the shoulders. "Let's see, Grandpa, do you know what happens to snitches?" With a single movement, the tallest one cut off a lock of his hair. The restaurant fell silent. The tension was palpable. The old man didn't react. He just raised his head, slowly took off his glasses, and that's when everything changed. His eyes, cold as knives, pierced the young men. One stepped back, another lowered the camera, and the third simply couldn't move, because this wasn't just any grandpa. He was someone they should never have provoked. Who was this man? Why did his gaze paralyze criminals? What would happen next would forever mark everyone present. Subscribe now and stay until the end. What you are about to see is not just any story. The man's name was Don Julian Madera, although no one knew it at that moment. To most, he was just another old man, one of those who go unnoticed, as if the city had swallowed them little by little. He arrived every Thursday at the same restaurant, ordered the same thing, arrachera tacos without onions, ice-cold mineral water, and sat in the same corner with his back to the wall. From there, he saw everything. The waiters knew he didn't talk much. He only nodded. He always paid in cash, never left a tip. But what they didn't know was that every Thursday wasn't a ritual of habit, it was surveillance. That afternoon, after the humiliating haircut, the young men returned to their table amidst forced laughter. They didn't know why, but something bothered them. The old man hadn't screamed or asked for help. He hadn't shown fear. There was something in his calm that was more unsettling than any threat. "What if it wasn't him?" asked the youngest, named Gyro, in a trembling voice. "What if what?" replied Marco, the leader, in an aggressive tone to disguise his own doubt. "Nothing. I'm just saying that." His eyes. "I felt like he was reading me from the inside out," Gyro replied. Don Julian, meanwhile, had resumed his meal. Each bite was chewed slowly. But behind that calm, his mind was working at full speed. He hadn't forgotten a single face. He recognized them. He had seen them before in files, in surveillance photos. They were pawns of someone much bigger, and if they had come to him, then his cover was failing. It was then that Natalia, a young new waitress with barely a week at the restaurant, entered. Her eyes met Don Julian's, and something inside her ignited. It wasn't fear, it was intuition, that kind of instinct that one cannot explain. "Is everything okay with your food, sir?" she asked, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Don Julian looked up, and for the first time in years spoke more than 2 words. "Tell the manager not to close at 10 tonight. This is just beginning." Natalia blinked, confused. "Excuse me." But he was no longer looking at her. His eyes were fixed on the reflection in the window. A black car had parked in front of the restaurant. 2 men got out. One of them had a tattoo on his neck, a skull biting a dagger. Don Julian swallowed hard, put the fork on the napkin, and took a deep breath. Inside, memories stirred. The jungle in Colombia, the prisons in Guatemala, the last assignment in Matamoros. He had buried all that. He had retired, or so he thought, until now. The young men at the back table also noticed the car. Marco cursed under his breath. They weren't expecting reinforcements. The old informant. Joke had been a stupid impulse, and now it seemed that someone important was finding out. The atmosphere became tense. The customers began to perceive the discomfort. Natalia, still with the tray in her hands, felt a chill on the back of her neck, as if she were trapped in the prelude to a storm. Don Julian stood up, slowly. With the dignity of a soldier, who knows that battle has found him even if he didn't seek it out. "Sir, are you going to leave?" Natalia asked in a faint voice. He leaned in slightly, with a low and clear voice. "If you don't get out of here in 2 minutes, you won't live to tell about it." She swallowed hard. She didn't understand everything, but she believed his words. As if the soul of that man spoke louder than her reason. Outside, the 2 men from the car were heading to the door. Inside, Marco took something out of his pocket, a small gun, wrapped in a towel, and Don Julian, the grandpa, walked toward the bathroom, but not to hide. He was going to look for what he had buried more than 20 years ago, his true face. The restaurant bathroom had a small window, broken in one corner, barely enough to let in air from the back alley. Don Julian entered with a firm step, locked the door, and stared at himself in the mirror. For a second, he saw the frail old man that everyone thought he was, and then he saw what he always was, a ghost with a history of gunpowder. He reached under the sink, where an old rusty metal box rested, stuck with industrial tape. The box was still there. No one had touched it. As he opened it, his fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from recognition, like a musician returning to his instrument after years of silence. Inside there was a military knife with a curved blade, a chain with a St. Michael medal worn by time, and a Sig Sauer pistol wrapped in a plastic bag. He loaded it with expert, almost mechanical hands. Meanwhile, in the main room, the 2 tattooed men crossed the door. One tall, burly, with a bulldog face, the other thinner, but with eyes that scanned every corner like a radar. They moved as if they had the right to anyone's life in that place, and in a way they did. "Where is he?" the tall one asked the first waiter he crossed. "Who?" the young man stammered, clearly intimidated. "The old man, the one who sits back there. Where is he?" Natalia from the bar swallowed hard. She didn't know what to do. Part of her wanted to flee, another, to stay and observe. Something in her instinct told her that she was witnessing something out of the ordinary, as if reality had fractured and she was now part of a movie she didn't ask to star in. Behind, at the back table, Marco shifted uneasily. He recognized the newcomers, Ramiro and Tico, 2 thugs in the service of El Jarocho, a drug lord from the south with a reputation for disappearing. Although everyone knew he had only changed his name and area, Marco knew that if those men were there, it wasn't by chance. And if they found out that they had been the ones who bothered the old man, they were finished. "Maybe he went to the bathroom," said Gyro, trying to sound useful. Tico turned his head slowly, like a snake measuring its prey. "And how do you know that?" "I saw him a minute ago. He walked that way," he pointed. Ramiro nodded and advanced towards the bathroom. In the back alley, a silent figure appeared from the broken window. Don Julian slid with the stealth of an old but lethal jaguar. He knew he couldn't face them head-on, at least not yet. He had to see, listen, understand how deep the hunt was. He went around the building until he reached a small gate that led to the parking lot. From there, he watched as Ramiro pushed the bathroom door violently and found no one. Inside, Marco stood up abruptly. The gun in his pocket weighed like a sentence. He thought about going out, talking, explaining that it had all been a joke. But he knew that in that world the word joke didn't exist. Natalia took advantage of the commotion to walk towards the kitchen. She had the phone in her hand, and her thumb was already dialing 911, but she didn't dare to press. What if they saw them? What if they brought more men outside? Tico, as if sensing her movement, turned and intercepted her halfway. "Where to, sweetheart?" "To get more napkins," she improvised. Silence returned to invade the place. It was at that instant that the restaurant light flickered, a brief blink, but enough for everyone to look at the ceiling. And when they turned their eyes to the ground, Don Julian was already inside. Standing next to the kitchen entrance, with the gun in his right hand, the St. Michael medal shining on his chest, and a look that left no room for doubt. Tico managed to move his hand towards his waist, but Julian was faster. "Don't even try it," he said. And for the first time, his voice rumbled like a war order. The sound of the safety being released resonated like a contained thunder in the restaurant. No one dared to move. Don Julian held the weapon firmly, not like someone who improvises, but like someone who has fired more times than he has counted. Tico raised his hands slowly. Ramiro in the background came out of the bathroom hearing the voice. As soon as he saw the armed old man, he froze. He recognized him. Rumors said he was dead, that he had last been seen in an operation in Michoacan, and that his body was never found. But there he was, standing in front of him, more alive than ever. "You? Is it you?" Ramiro murmured. Don Julian took a step forward. "Tell El Jarocho that I also know how to send messages," he said coldly. Ramiro looked down. He knew that facing him would be suicide. Meanwhile, Marco couldn't believe what he was seeing. The grandpa, whose hair they had cut a few hours earlier, was now dominating the scene, disarming with just his presence two thugs that he himself feared. Natalia, still in the kitchen, watched from behind the counter. Her hands were shaking, but there was something in that figure that inspired confidence. The old man wasn't an armed madman. He was a man who knew exactly what he was doing. "What do you want?" Tico asked, still with his hands up. "I want to know why you came for me today. Who told you I was here?" Tico hesitated. "They gave us a photo. They said to watch him. Nothing else." "Who?" Don Julian insisted without raising his voice, but with an edge in his words that cut more than a scream. "A new guy. They call him El Mudo, the Mute. He's looking for safe places for El Jarocho. They say they suspect you're talking to the DEA." Julian clenched his teeth. He knew the name of El Mudo well. He was a silent but lethal messenger, an expert in torture, in making even the most loyal talk. If he was involved, then it wasn't a simple operation. It was personal. "Tell them I'm retired, that if they look for me again, there will be no warning," he said, slowly lowering the gun. At that instant, the silence was interrupted by a small applause. Everyone turned towards the restaurant entrance. A thin man in a grey suit, dark glasses and a serpentine smile was leaning against the doorframe. Next to him, two more. They hadn't been seen entering. Well, well. So it's true. The ghost is still alive. Don Julian didn't need more. He recognized that voice. It was Carlos, El Lince. The Lynx, a former undercover operations partner who years ago had deserted and sold himself to the Jarocho cartel. Julian thought he was dead, but there he was, smiling as if hell had given him permission to leave for a while. "You look old, Julian. Do ghosts also age?" "And traitors also die sooner or later," he replied without blinking. El Lince advanced a few steps, his hands in his pockets. "We came in peace, we just wanted to confirm a rumor. And look what we found, the legendary executor of the old guard, defending a neighborhood restaurant." Don Julian didn't lower his guard. He knew that behind those words there was poison. "What does El Jarocho want?" "The same as you, peace. But for that, he needs to eliminate loose ends. And you are a very loose one." Customers began to leave slowly, guided by the waiters who took advantage of the distraction. Natalia also took a step back, but Julian's eyes stopped her. She understood. She had to stay. "I propose a deal," El Lince continued. "You hand over the information you have, you disappear, and we pretend we never saw you." Julian looked at him in silence. El Lince was always an elegant liar. He knew that no deal with him ended well, but the most serious thing wasn't that. The most serious thing was that El Jarocho had put a price on his head, and now he knew he was surrounded, and that he would have to prepare the ground for a war he thought was over. Don Julian didn't respond immediately. He kept his eyes fixed on El Lince, calculating every possible outcome. His years of experience taught him that, in moments like that, silence was more powerful than any threat. El Lince, for his part, held the smile like a mask, but his eyes revealed something else. Unease. "No deal," Julian said at last in a firm voice. "Then you force me to make it difficult." El Lince replied, making a slight signal with his chin. One of his men advanced, but as soon as he took 2 steps, Don Julian fired at the ground between his feet. The roar shook the restaurant. Natalia stifled a scream. Marco and his friends shrank in their table, paralyzed by fear. "The next one goes to the forehead," Julian added, pointing directly. El Lince raised his hands, still smiling. "Calm down, old man. We're not here to make a circus. We just came to talk, but I see you're still as stubborn as ever." "And you just as cowardly," Julian replied. An uncomfortable silence settled in. El Lince looked around, noticed that the restaurant was almost empty. His face changed as if the game had stopped amusing him. "You know this isn't going to end here. El Jarocho wants your head, and I'm just the messenger. Sooner or later more will come, and it won't be with words." "Then I'll wait for them," Julian said, lowering the gun slowly, but without putting it away. El Lince turned around. Before leaving, he dropped a card on the bar. "In case you change your mind." And he left. Ramiro and Tico followed him without saying a word. The door closed. Only then, those who were still in the place dared to breathe. Julian turned to Natalia. The young woman was trembling, but she hadn't moved. He nodded respectfully, acknowledging her silent courage. "Thanks for not screaming," he said. "What's happening?" she asked, barely audible. "Old debts. They want to collect now." Natalia didn't fully understand, but her gaze no longer held fear, but a growing worry. She knew that if she didn't do something, it would all escalate. Julian walked towards the table where Marco was still frozen. He looked him in the eyes. "Did you start this?" Marco nodded, unable to hold his gaze. "We thought you were a snitch," he stammered. "You thought I was weak," Julian corrected him. "And that has consequences. Are you going to kill us?" "If I wanted to, you'd already be dead," he replied without raising his voice. "But what you did brought the devil to this door." Marco swallowed hard. He had never felt so small. Julian turned to Natalia. "Is there a place upstairs where I can talk to you without being overheard?" "Yes. A small storage room. It's empty. Take me." They climbed a narrow staircase that led to a metal door. Inside, old boxes, folded tablecloths, and a flickering hanging lamp. "Why did you want to talk to me?" she asked. Julian took a small, old-fashioned cell phone with no internet connection from his pocket. He showed it to her. "There's something on here that they want. Something that could destroy El Jarocho and half the cartel if it falls into the right hands. And why don't you give it to the police? Because there's no cop here who isn't bought. I kept it for years, thinking no one would ever look for it. But I was wrong." Natalia crossed her arms. "And what do you want me to do?" Julian looked at her seriously. "I want you to keep it." "What?" "If something happens to me, you'll know who to give it to." "And why me?" Julian was silent for a few seconds. "Because you didn't scream. Because you looked at me without disgust. And because you still have that look, the look of someone who hasn't been corrupted." Natalia pursed her lips. She didn't know if accepting was bravery or madness. But something in her, an impulse stronger than fear, made her extend her hand. "Okay, but I'm not giving it to anyone, unless you don't come back." Julian handed her the cell phone. And for the first time in years, he trusted someone. What he didn't know was that at that moment, a camera was watching them from the lamppost in front of the restaurant. And on the other side of the screen, someone had already given the order to go after both of them. Night fell over Sinaloa with a heavy silence. The restaurant was already closed, but there were still lights on inside. Natalia pretended to clean tables while her mind raced. The small cell phone that Don Julian had given her now rested inside her purse, wrapped in a cloth, as if she were carrying dynamite. Don Julian, meanwhile, was in the back of the restaurant, near the storage room. He wasn't sleeping. He only closed his eyes for a moment, like an old lion sniffing danger from afar. The calm before the storm was familiar to him. But this time there was something different. He wasn't alone. He had stopped trusting people a long time ago. The last person he had given his loyalty to ended up betraying him for a handful of dollars, and a woman who never loved him. But Natalia wasn't part of his past, and that's why perhaps she could be part of his last play. Meanwhile, in another corner of the city, in an unmarked house shrouded in shadows, 3 men watched the recording from the restaurant. The municipal surveillance camera had captured the moment when Julian and Natalia entered the storage room. "Are you sure it's him?" asked one with a deep voice. "It's been confirmed. Facial recognition at 87%. El Jarocho wants you to act tonight," said the second, younger, typing on his laptop. The third didn't speak. He just smoked in the shadows. His face was covered by a scar that ran from his eyebrow to his jaw. He was Ivan the tailor, a meticulous killer, known for sewing the lips of his victims before executing them. And now he had a new mission. "Julian Madeira, the ghost is back," he said in a dry tone. "Let's bury him for real this time." Back at the restaurant, Natalia finished cleaning and sat down in front of Julian, who was patiently preparing a disassembled weapon on an old blanket. "Did you really kill people?" she asked abruptly. Julian looked at her without emotion. They weren't people, they were monsters. Men who kidnapped children, burned villages, buried their enemies alive. "I was part of a special unit, until I understood that the monsters were on both sides." Natalia lowered her gaze. "And that's why you hid here?" "Here I found silence, hot food, and the illusion that I could die as a civilian. And now? Now I have to go back to being what I was. One last time." Natalia got up and walked towards the door, but before leaving she stopped. "Isn't there someone who can help you? Some friend?" Julian hesitated for a few seconds. Then he opened his yellowed notebook. There, under an old photo, was written a single name, Colonel Tobias Ordóñez. "There's one, but if I look for him, there'll be no turning back." Natalia nodded. "Then look for him, because if they come, they won't come alone." That night, as the sky was covered with dense clouds, Julian walked to an old telephone booth. He dialed a number forgotten for almost 2 decades from memory. The line rang 3 times before a tired voice answered. "Who's speaking?" "Tobias, it's me, the one who wasn't supposed to come back." A long silence followed on the other end. "Are you crazy? Do you know what you're doing calling this number? I have no other choice. They found me and they're coming for more." "Where are you?" "At Los Molcajetes de Doña Eva." "Received. Wait for me there. I'll arrive at dawn." Julian hung up. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope, but he also knew that asking for help came at a price. Back at the restaurant, Natalia had secured all the doors, but she didn't see the silhouette watching her from the roof of the building across the street. The tailor was already there, and he wasn't alone. He came with clear orders: eliminate Julian and take the girl alive. The early morning advanced slowly and silently. The air was thick, laden with a calm that wasn't peace and but contained waiting. Don Julian remained seated by the window, the pistol within reach, his eyes fixed on the darkness outside. The clock read 4:23 a.m. Hours still remained before Colonel Tobias arrived, but the enemies were already closer than he imagined. In an abandoned building in front of the restaurant, the tailor watched with thermal binoculars. Beside him, 2 men dressed in black reviewed the layout of the restaurant. Every movement had been calculated with precision. The entry routes, the blind spots, the dark corners. The plan wasn't improvised, it was a surgical execution. "She sleeps in the storage room. He patrols like an old dog," said one of the hitmen. "Perfect," replied the tailor, putting out his cigarette. "We enter at 4:45. The old man dies quickly. The girl, we need her intact. And if she resists, then you sedate her, but nothing more." In the restaurant, Natalia couldn't sleep. She had improvised a mattress with blankets and cushions in the storage room, but fear wouldn't let her close her eyes. She kept the cell phone hidden under her bra, as if the warmth of her body could protect it. Suddenly, she heard a dry, metallic sound, a click that didn't come from inside, but from the roof. She sat up in silence. Then another click, and then a creak. Someone was up there. She jumped out of her makeshift bed and ran to the hallway. She found Don Julian in position, as if he had sensed it. He raised his hand, asking her for silence. "Did you hear it?" "Yes, there's someone outside." Julian positioned himself behind the counter, from where he had a direct view of the entrance and the back. He placed his pistol on a towel to dampen the sound. He took a deep breath. The old instinct returned like an old enemy, precise, cold, inevitable. Meanwhile, the hitmen moved like shadows. One rappelled down from the roof with a rope. Another opened the back door with an electronic lockpick. In seconds, the restaurant stopped being a refuge and became a rat trap. The first to enter was Carrion, a burly hitman, an expert in silent entries. As soon as he touched the ground, he felt a slight pressure on the back of his neck. He didn't have time to react. Too slow to be lethal. Julian whispered behind him. A necklock, a quick turn, and the body fell silently. Julian dragged the corpse to the storeroom. Natalia's legs were trembling. "They're going to keep coming in. We can't stay here," she said. "Do you know how to shoot?" "No." He took a small pistol from his ankle. "Now you're going to learn, but only if necessary. Aim at the chest, never at the head." "It's not like in the movies," Natalia nodded, swallowing hard. Her breathing was accelerating, but her eyes remained firm. She wasn't a victim. She didn't want to be. At that moment, a smoke grenade was thrown through the back door. A thick curtain began to fill the restaurant. "Get down!" Julian shouted, pushing Natalia to the floor. The hitmen entered from both flanks. Silenced shots ricocheted off the walls. Julian rolled behind the counter and took down one with surgical precision. Another shot grazed his shoulder, making him recoil. Natalia, with her ears ringing, saw the tailor enter through the main door. His gaze searched for her as if he already knew her. Julian saw him too. He knew instantly that this man wasn't just a simple thug. "Run! To the basement!" Julian shouted. "Where is it?" "Under the kitchen, maintenance hatch, now!" Natalia ran. The tailor fired but missed by centimeters. Julian returned fire, covering her until she disappeared under the hatch. The smoke continued to expand. The silenced bullets still sang their lethal song, but the old hitman resisted, because even though death surrounded him, his war wasn't over yet. The hatch under the kitchen closed with a dry thud. Natalia descended gropingly down an old metal ladder that creaked with each step. Below, the darkness was total. The air smelled of earth, old grease, and accumulated humidity. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, but when turned on, it barely illuminated a square meter. It wasn't a refuge. It was a makeshift hiding place designed to last minutes, not hours. Above, the restaurant looked like a miniature battlefield. The smoke was beginning to dissipate, but there were still areas where the shadows were barely distinguishable. Don Julian, with a bleeding wound on his shoulder, had managed to take down 3 of the attackers. There were still at least 2 left besides the tailor. He crawled behind the freezer and reloaded his weapon. The pain was sharp but tolerable. He had learned to ignore injuries since he was young. What he couldn't ignore was the certainty. They were better armed, younger, and wanted him dead. He looked at the clock. 5:11 a.m. The colonel must be close, he thought. The sound of quick footsteps indicated that someone was approaching. He fired instinctively. A bullet whistled and embedded itself in the wood. But he wasn't alone. Another figure flanked him on the left. Julian rolled towards a fallen table and opened a metal box with old emergency flares. He took one out and lit it. A red light invaded the place, cutting through the darkness like a flare in hell. The attackers exposed themselves unintentionally. Julian fired twice and heard a dry groan, then silence. The tailor hid in the farthest corner. He watched everything without moving, like a predator measuring the patience of its prey. Now he knew that they underestimated the old man, but he wasn't worried. He had an ace up his sleeve. In the basement, Natalia held the gun as Julian had taught her. Her breathing was rapid, but there was no panic. With each passing second, her intuition screamed that not everything was as it seemed. The old man wasn't just an ex-hitman, he was something more. Suddenly, she heard a metallic sound behind her. A side door covered by old boxes opened slowly. A robust man in a military uniform and grey beret appeared, pointing a rifle. "Natalia? Who are you?" "Colonel Tobias Ordóñez. Where's Julian?" "Upstairs, alone. He's wounded." Tobias nodded. He extended his hand and helped her out. His gaze was that of a man who has seen too much, but still retains his center. They went up the stairs while another of his men entered through the back door of the restaurant, eliminating the last of the rank-and-file hitmen with surgical precision. The tailor noticed the change in the atmosphere. He crouched down, retreated towards the main door, but it was already too late. Tobias appeared at the end of the hallway, rifle raised. "Still playing at killing ghosts, Ivan?" The tailor turned slowly, showing his palms. "Tobias, what a surprise. I didn't know you had also come back from retirement." "I haven't come back. I just came to settle an outstanding debt." At that moment, Julian appeared from behind a counter, staggering, but still with his weapon firm. "Leave him to me," he said in a hoarse voice. Tobias hesitated for a second. He lowered his rifle and nodded. 5 minutes. Then I'm getting him out of here, dead or alive." The tailor laughed softly. "You're a fossil, Julian. You don't have the strength for this anymore." "Maybe," he replied, "but I still know how to make the past bleed." Both men began to circle each other, a slow-motion duel. Each step was measured, each look was an unclosed chapter. Natalia, from the hatch, watched in silence. She couldn't move. She couldn't intervene. She knew that this moment didn't belong to her. It was a reckoning between two men who were already dead inside. The clock read 5:27. The sky was beginning to clear, and the final confrontation was about to begin. Time slowed down inside the restaurant as if the universe were holding its breath. Don Julian and the tailor remained standing, circling each other, both knowing that it wasn't just a physical duel, but a struggle to close a cycle that had been open for too long. Natalia, from the hallway, had her heart in her throat. Colonel Tobias, on the other hand, remained firm, observing, knowing that this confrontation had to happen. He too carried the shadows of a dirty past. But Julian deserved to finish what he had started. "Why does El Jarocho want me dead now after so many years?" Julian asked, without lowering his weapon. The tailor smiled mockingly. "Because you have something that can bury him, and because you made the mistake of staying alive." "I don't have anything," he replied. "Liar," the tailor snapped. "The Hive report. The file that disappeared before the last operation. You were carrying it. You hid it before disappearing, and El Jarocho needs it off the map." Julian frowned. La Colmena's report was more than just a document. It was a compendium of covert operations involving the cartel, politicians, the military, even agents of their own government. If it came to light, the entire country would be shaken. "How many innocents died because of this file?" Julian asked, pained. "Innocents? There are no innocents in this war, only survivors." "Well, I'm tired of surviving," he said, tightening his grip on the trigger. But he didn't fire. The tailor slowly lowered his weapon. He took a step forward. Julian didn't stop him. "You know what's the most curious thing?" the tailor whispered. "That file is already in motion." Julian frowned. "What did you say?" "Your waitress, the girl. Did you really think I'd trust someone like that? Without being watched?" Julian felt a pit in his stomach. "No. We've been tracking her since you gave it to her. That cell phone has a transmitter. El Jarocho already knows where she is." Julian's blood ran cold. "Natalia!" he shouted, turning on his heels. But it was too late. A shot rang out from outside the restaurant. Julian threw himself to the ground. Tobias ran towards the hallway. The tailor took advantage of the chaos to slip out the side door. On the floor, Natalia lay curled up, her arm covering her face but with no visible wound. The shot had been a warning, a shot at the doorframe. Someone was watching them from further away. Tobias helped her up. "Are you okay?" Yes, I just got a scratch." Julian arrived seconds later. His eyes met Natalia's, and for the first time, she saw him hesitate. Not out of fear, but out of guilt. "I got you into this," he said. "You saved me first," she replied, touching his wounded shoulder. Tobias pulled a small device from his pocket, a signal jammer. He activated it and placed it near Natalia's bag. The cell phone she was carrying stopped transmitting. "Now we're blind," Tobias said, "but so are they." "How long do we have before more arrive?" Julian asked. "Less than an hour. There's movement in the perimeter. We intercepted communications. El Jarocho has already sent a full team." "They're coming for the file," And for you." Julian took a deep breath. "Then there's no turning back." He went to the storage room and took out a wooden box hidden behind a false wall. Inside, there were documents, maps, CDs, and photos, irrefutable evidence. It was the file everyone wanted. "This has to get out of the country," he told Tobias. "But first I have to finish with the tailor." "It's not personal, is it?" "It's justice," Julian replied. Natalia approached. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was clear. "What's going to happen to us?" "You're going to survive," Julian said. I'm going to close a chapter." The tension was growing. Outside, in the darkness, the cartel's trucks were already parking silently. And inside, the old hitman was preparing his last move. The clock read 5:58 a.m. when the first black truck stopped in front of the restaurant. 6 armed men descended from inside, protected by tactical vests, all with synchronized headsets. They moved like an assault unit. They weren't improvising, they were trained hunters, sent to eliminate Don Julian and recover the file. From the second-floor window, Colonel Tobias watched the movements with binoculars. Beside him, Natalia carried a backpack with the file, protected by an improvised metal plate that he himself had tied to her chest. "They have military training," Tobias murmured. "Ex-special forces. This is going to be worse than we imagined." Downstairs, Don Julian adjusted the magazines, checked the angle of each entrance, placed rudimentary traps with bottles, glass, and oil on the floor. The restaurant was no longer a dining room. It was an urban battlefield. "Are you sure about this?" Tobias asked, walking down the stairs. "There's no other option. If they cross that door and find us together, we all die. We could go out through the basement." "And lead them to her," Julian replied. "No. You get her out when this starts. I'll hold them back." "That's suicide. Not if I divide them first." Tobias wanted to argue, but he knew Julian was right. The old man was determined. And men like him, when they decide to die standing, don't accept being dragged down. Outside, the hitmen separated into 2 teams. The first would surround the premises and enter through the alley. The second would break down the main door. One of them carried a battering ram. Another held a sawn-off shotgun. In 3, 2, 1, boom! The main door shattered into splinters. The team burst in shouting, but immediately a trap was activated. A rope released a shelf of drinks that fell with force, knocking down 2 men. Don Julian, crouched behind the bar, fired 3 times. A bullet hit a hitman in the thigh. Another took a hit in the shoulder. The third took cover behind a column. From the rear, the others tried to open the kitchen door, but Tobias threw a Molotov cocktail at them from the upper window. The fire forced them to retreat. Natalia, following instructions, descended into the basement with the backpack. She carried a flashlight, a radio, and an unloaded pistol. Tobias promised her that when the signal came, he would get her out through the tunnel that connected to the old bakery across the street. Meanwhile, the restaurant was filled with gunfire. The walls trembled, the windows shattered one by one. Julian moved like a shadow, hitting, dodging, taking down enemies with a chilling precision for his age, but the tailor had not yet appeared. And that worried him more than the bullets. At 6:07 a.m., a sudden silence took hold of the place. Only the groans of the wounded could be heard. Julian, hidden behind the coffee machine, tried to control his breathing. Then a voice emerged from the speaker of one of the dead hitmen. It was the tailor. "Very nice show, Julian. You're like those old wolves that bite until their last breath. But this isn't over." "Come out and say it to my face," Julian shouted. "Oh, I will, but first tell me, has she already fled? Or is she still there waiting for you like a faithful daughter?" Julian clenched his teeth. "If you touch her, I know, you'll kill me. You told me the same thing years ago about Sophia." The name echoed like a grenade in Julian's chest. Sophia had been his daughter. Executed on the orders of the cartel when he refused to hand over information, it was the day he decided to disappear, and the tailor had been the one watching him then. "That's unforgivable," Julian murmured. "Then come get me," the tailor challenged. And the old hitman knew that now he was no longer fighting for revenge, he was fighting for redemption. Julian emerged from the smoke and rubble, his face bloody but his eyes firmer than ever. Sophia's name had shaken him like lightning, but it didn't break him. It reinforced him. It was an open wound, yes, but also a flame that burned inside him. If the tailor thought that invoking his daughter would give him an advantage, he was wrong. From the speaker, the silence was replaced by a slight hum, and then by an encrypted message. Julian recognized the code. They were coordinates, but they weren't from the cartel. They were from the file. In the basement, Natalia felt the old cell phone vibrate. Although it was deactivated by the jammer, the message appeared on the screen. Trust no one. Get it out today. There's more than El Jarocho in this. Her eyes widened. She looked towards the hatch of the tunnel, but something stopped her. She couldn't leave. Not without knowing if Julian was alive. Upstairs, the tailor finally burst in, entering through the hole in the roof like a poisonous shadow. His weapon pointed with surgical precision. His steps were silent, but Julian was waiting for him. Have you come to finish what you started? I've come to clean up what you left dirty, the tailor replied. I didn't come to kill you. I came to bury you in silence. Then why am I still breathing? Because they don't need you dead. They just want the file. Julian raised his weapon, but the tailor was faster. He shot at his hand, disarming him. Julian fell to his knees. The pain was sharp, piercing, but he didn't scream. The tailor approached with the gun to the old man's forehead. I warned you. But at that instant, a bullet pierced him from the side. The shot came from the second floor. Tobias had returned to his position, and seeing the tailor exposed, didn't hesitate. The tailor fell to the side, gasping, dropping his weapon. Julian, still on his knees, looked at him with contained rage. He approached slowly and grabbed him by the collar of his vest. Who else is behind this? He asked. The tailor laughed, with blood on his teeth. You never understood. This was never just the cartel. This comes from above. From very high up. What does that mean? It means that file isn't evidence. It's a death sentence for everyone. With a last breath, the tailor died. Julian released him, letting him fall heavily. At that moment, Natalia appeared from the basement stairs. Are you okay? She asked, seeing his wounded hand. Yes, but we have to get out of here. Tobias ran down with the radio in his hand. We have a problem. They intercepted the signal of the file. It wasn't just El Jarocho. Intelligence services are on their way. Who leaked it? I don't know. But if they want it, it's because there are big names involved. Julian clenched his jaw. He knew what that meant. The file was more powerful than they thought. He couldn't simply hand it over. Not to the police, not to the press. There's only one option, he said, looking at Natalia. You have to take it, where no one can find you, where they can listen without killing. And you? We're going to cover you, Tobias said. We'll clear the way, but once you leave, don't look back. Natalia wanted to protest, but Julian took her hand tenderly. This is for Sophia, and for all those who died without justice. He handed her a second backpack, with false identities, cash, and the cell phone with the encrypted message. You have to trust yourself, he said. I've already done what I had to. The sun was beginning to rise on the horizon. Sirens could be heard in the distance. The roar of helicopters filled the sky. Natalia turned around one last time. Will I see you again? Maybe in another life, Julian whispered with a sad smile. She nodded with tears in her eyes and disappeared through the tunnel. Tobias loaded his rifle. Julian, wounded, picked up a pistol from the floor, and together they prepared to face the greatest enemy of all, the system they themselves helped to build, and that was now coming for their heads. Days later, at a small bus station on the southern border, a young woman with a determined look and a backpack on her shoulder boarded a vehicle with an unknown destination. No one knew her name. No one asked why she was crying silently as the engine started, but she knew that she carried in her hands a truth more powerful than any weapon. Natalia had kept her promise. The file was in motion, traveling in encrypted parts to exiled journalists, human rights defenders, and international leaders. She didn't trust governments or institutions. She trusted the truth. And in what Julian taught her, that justice is not always achieved with bullets, but with courage. Of the restaurant, only ruins remained. The confrontation was silenced by the authorities. The official version spoke of a settling of accounts between gangs. No one mentioned Don Julian. No one spoke of Tobias. They disappeared like ghosts. But in the neighborhoods, among rumors and whispers, a story began to circulate. The story of the little old man from the restaurant, who faced a cartel with bloody hands and a heart full of scars. Some said he died. Others swore they had seen him in a distant town, walking with a little girl by the hand. The truth is that legends do not die. They only hide until they are needed again. And as long as there is darkness, there will always be someone willing to light a spark. If this story moved you, subscribe, share, because maybe you also know someone who, in silence, is fighting their own war. Memory is resistance, and this story is just begun.